There's a house at the end of our street that's been condemned for years. Boarded up, empty, dark. Nobody's lived there since before we moved in. But every night, after midnight, a light comes on in one of its upstairs windows, a warm, steady light, in a house with the power cut off. In a house nobody's allowed to enter, and some nights the light goes off again, like someone up there has finally gone to bed. Welcome back. It's just you and me in the dark tonight. 3 true stories about the house at the end of the street. Every neighborhood has one. The one that's a little too quiet, a little too dark, the one the kids dare each other to touch. And the ones who tell these stories learned the hard way why nobody visits it. Let's begin. Every street has that house. Ours was at the very end, past where the sidewalk gave out. An old 2-story that had been condemned for as long as anyone could remember. Boarded windows, sagging porch, a chain-link fence with a faded notice on it. The power was cut. The water was off. It was tied up in some legal limbo, the kind of place that just sits and rots because no one can afford to tear it down or fix it up. Everyone on the street knew it was empty, and everyone on the street, though we didn't talk about it much, knew about the light. After midnight, most nights, a light would come on in one of the upstairs windows, warm, yellow, steady, a lamp, not a flashlight, not a reflection. It would burn for a while, an hour or two, in a house with no electricity, and then it would go out, just go out, the way a light goes out when someone reaches over and clicks off a lamp before sleep, in a condemned, boarded, empty house that no one had legally set foot in for years. We told ourselves the usual things. Squatters, kids, a trick of a passing car. But squatters don't have working lamps in a house with no power. Kids don't come every night for years. And the light was always the same window, always the same warm glow, always that same quiet click-off, like a nightly routine. Like someone lived there and kept regular hours and went to bed. I got curious once, the way you do. I walked down there one night to the fence to look, and standing at that chain-link fence, looking up at the lit window, I could see, against the warm glow, a shape, a silhouette, moving slowly across the room behind the glass. Someone up there, in the empty house, doing the small, unhurried movements of a person getting ready for bed, turning down a blanket maybe, setting something on a nightstand. And then the silhouette reached toward the light, and the light clicked off, and the window went black. And the house was just a condemned house again. And I was standing alone at a fence in the dark with my heart going. I asked an old neighbor about it, one who'd lived on the street his whole life. And he told me the light had been coming on every night for as long as he could remember, since he was a boy, the same window. He said his father had told him to never ever go into that house, not on a dare, not for any reason. He said families had tried to buy it over the decades, to fix it up, and every single one had backed out or moved away fast, and none would say why. And he said the thing that made me stop walking down there at night. He said the light isn't a warning. The light is an invitation. That house isn't empty, he said. It's occupied. It's always been occupied. And the one up there keeps a light on at night for the same reason anyone does, so that someone passing in the dark might see it and be drawn to it and come to the door. He said the light going off doesn't mean it's gone to sleep. It means it's given up waiting for tonight, and that it'll try again tomorrow. It's very patient, he said. It's had a long, long time to learn how to wait. And every so often, over the years, somebody does walk up to that door. and the street just gets a little quieter and nobody talks about it, and the light keeps coming on. I couldn't leave it there. The old neighbor's words about people walking up to the door and the street getting quieter. So I looked into it at the county records office, and I found that the house at the end of our street had, on paper, no owner at all. Not abandoned, not foreclosed, no owner. The chain of ownership simply stopped decades back at a name and then nothing, as if the house had been left off every list since. And I found something else in the old local papers, a small thing, easy to miss. Over the years, going back a very long way, there'd been a scattering of people from our street reported missing. Not many. One every decade or so, spaced far enough apart that no one ever connected them. A man out for a late walk, a teenager on a dare, a woman who couldn't sleep. Each one in their time had lived on our street. Each had vanished without a trace, no body, no sign, case gone cold. And when I laid the dates out, I felt sick, because they lined up with the nights the light burns longest, the nights the old-timers said that it waits up latest, hoping. The house doesn't take often, it doesn't have to, it just keeps a light on and waits, and every 10 years or so, someone in the dark decides to answer it. That house only ever needed a light and patience. The next man's empty house down the street needed a moving truck instead, one that came and unloaded at 3 a.m. into a house no one lived in. The house at the end of his block had been empty and for sale for years, a nice enough house that just never sold, sitting dark. And one night, unable to sleep, he was up around 3 a.m. and he heard a truck. He looked out and saw a moving truck, a big box truck, backed up to that empty house, and figures unloading it. Furniture, boxes, carrying them up the walk and into the house in the dead of night, working quickly and silently in the dark. New owners moving in at 3 a.m. Strange, but he figured people do strange things, cheaper rates, whatever. He watched for a bit and went back to bed. In the morning, the house was empty again. For sale sign still up, windows dark, no truck, no sign anyone had moved in at all. And the man figured he'd dreamed it or misjudged which house. But a few weeks later it happened again. The truck at 3 a.m, the silent figures unloading furniture into the empty house. And gone by dawn, the house dark and vacant as ever. It happened every few weeks. A moving truck, deep in the night, movers carrying a household's worth of furniture into a house that was empty every morning, that never had a resident, that stayed forever for sale. He finally stayed up to watch the whole thing one night from his window. The truck arrived at 3, the figures unloaded it, and he watched carefully now and saw that they weren't carrying furniture in. They were carrying it out of the empty house and into the truck, emptying it. But the house was already empty. He'd seen it, vacant 100 times. And yet, these figures, night after night, every few weeks, were removing furniture from it. A couch, a bed, a dresser, boxes, loading up a truck with the belongings of a home that had no belongings, and driving away before dawn. And here's what made him move. Because on the last night he watched, as they carried out an armchair and a lamp and a rolled-up rug, he recognized them. The furniture. It was his. It was his couch, his lamp, his rug, or their exact doubles, being carried out of the empty house at the end of the street and loaded into a truck in the dark, as if the house were quietly packing up his home, as if it were getting ready, one piece at a time, every few weeks, to move him in. He did something after that last night that he almost couldn't make himself do. In the morning, he went down to the empty house, in daylight, telling himself daylight was safe, and looked in through a gap in the boards over a front window, and the house was empty, completely. Bare floors, bare walls, dust, nothing, no furniture at all. None of what he'd watched carried out night after night. But on the bare floor of the front room in the dust, there were marks, impressions, the clean rectangles and squares where furniture had sat for a long time and then been removed, a couch-shaped clean patch, a bed-shaped one, the ghost prints of a whole household's worth of furniture pressed into decades of dust in a house that had stood empty and unfurnished the entire time, as if it had all been there once, invisibly, as if the house held a full, furnished home that only became real enough to move in the dark and only for as long as it took to carry it out to the truck. And he thought about the pieces he'd recognized as his own, and he did not wait to understand it any further. He put his house up for sale that week. He was not going to be there on the night the truck finally came to a stop in front of his own door. That truck was still making its rounds. The last story tonight is the one that parents write to me about most, because it's about a child at a window who waved. A woman walked her young son to school every morning, and their route took them past the empty house at the end of the street. The condemned one, boarded up, nobody home. And her son one morning waved at it. She asked who he was waving to, and he said, "The boy in the window." She looked and saw nothing. Boarded windows, dark glass, an empty house. But her son insisted. There was a boy up in the top window who waved at him every morning. A boy about his age. Her son thought he was nice. He said the boy in the window was lonely and couldn't come out and just liked to wave. She told herself it was imagination, a face in the grain of old wood, a child's game. But it troubled her, and she started really looking each morning at that top window as they passed. And one morning she saw it, just for a second, as her son waved and called out good morning. A pale face, small, at the height of a child, in the dark of the top window of the empty house, watching her son. And as her son waved, the face lifted a small, pale hand against the glass and waved back. She stopped walking her son past that house, changed their route entirely, added 10 minutes, whatever it took. And her son was sad about it. He missed his friend, he said, the boy in the window who'd waved at him every day. And a few weeks later, her son mentioned casually over breakfast that it was okay now, that he didn't need to walk past the house anymore because his friend had told him he'd found another way to visit, that he'd be coming to see him soon, that he was tired of the window and of waving and of being so far away, and that he couldn't wait for them to finally get to play up close in her son's room where it was warm. They moved fast, and she told me her son is fine, that he stopped talking about the boy in the window once they were somewhere new. But she keeps thinking about how her son described him that last morning. Not lonely anymore, not sad, excited. She asked her son gently in the weeks after to tell her everything about his friend in the window, needing to know and dreading it. And her son, happy to talk about him, told her things that stopped her cold. The boy in the window had been there a very long time, he said. He'd waved at lots of kids over the years, all the ones who walked to school past the house. But most of them, her son explained, couldn't really see him. They'd glance up and look away. They never waved back. They didn't believe. Her son was different. Her son had waved back every day and talked to him and believed in him. And that, the boy in the window had told him, was why they could be best friends now. Why he could finally leave the window. Because it takes a friend who really sees you and really believes to let you out. That's the rule, the boy had said. Someone has to believe you're really there. And then her son had said the thing that had them packed by the weekend. He'd looked up at his mother sweetly and asked, "Is that why he can come to my room now? Because I believed him hard enough?" Because for however many years that pale face had waved from that top window at the children walking to school, patient, friendly, waving, it had finally found one who waved back. And a thing that's been alone in a window that long, she thinks, doesn't stay in the window once it knows the way out. That's all for tonight. If this one's got you thinking about that one house on your street, then you know what to do. Subscribe and hit that bell, because there's a new true horror story here every single night, and you won't want to miss one. Give it a like so it finds the next person in the dark, and share it with someone who grew up near a house like that. I'll be right here tomorrow night, when the lights go down. Sleep well, if you can.
Like, share, and subscribe for daily horror stories every single day.